Today was the first day when I realized what I was feeling in my writing, and I started to figure out what it was that was making me write and then delete and then unlist and then write it again. And I realized that it was this missing skill set of compiling or maybe even controlling the emotion behind writing. And I think sometimes as a freelance writer, you get that kind of like, you have to learn that, right? Like you don't necessarily have this standard of writing per se. Like you're just kind of like writing, you're reading, you're writing, you're sharing your thoughts and your opinions, but you don't have this kind of like topical niche that sets limitations on what you can say and what you can't say. And you also kind of feel as though maybe these consequences may not apply to me because I'm not working within a certain industry. And I've always kind of looked at people who wrote like this and I was like critiquing them so heavily. But I started to realize just how offensive certain things can be. And even though my intentions are always really set on love and community, sometimes the emotion that I'm feeling is so passionate. And I just feel like I need to say this in the most simplistic way because I feel like it can reach the people who it needs to reach. And then I think that's when it really kind of comes off as offensive. I think one thing that I feel like I tried not to do in terms of like writing and, you know, when I'm talking about oppression, in this case, I was talking about Asians and my opinions in regards to the affirmative action videos that I've seen on TikTok, which again, like really shouldn't be referencing TikTok per se, but there were some news clips, again, still shouldn't be referencing TikTok. I know I should probably be looking it up myself, but I do believe that this was a credited source. But anyway, and I think one thing that I just kind of want to share with other marginalized groups, and I'm going to give them that. Even though I was like really against it, I'm going to give them that because I haven't done the research, the adequate amount of research. I haven't been in these rooms to really say whether or not I feel as though, you know what I mean? Or not even me feeling, but more so like I haven't seen it. So I can't sit here and say it doesn't exist. You know, I've seen it work to a benefit for some people, and I haven't seen their internals and their day-to-day lives and what they struggle with on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, let me not like be that person who's just like, you know what, Black people are the only people who are oppressed. Black people are the only people who are going through certain things. When I know that like wholeheartedly it's not entirely true. But I think one thing that I just kind of wanted to make clear with that article and just in general, it's like one thing that I think marginalized groups need to do is more so band together and not necessarily put one above the other and say my struggle. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's kind of what happens and what I noticed that takes place in a lot of these movements. And I don't like that because I think instead of it becoming allyship and instead of us banding together and pushing the goal forward for all of us to be equal and all of us to have certain opportunities or whatever the common goal is, it's always a matter of like, these are independent issues. And I don't like that because I just think that that really negates primal core rooted issues that is American history and slavery. And I think that that really kind of just overshadows a lot. You know what I mean? And I don't like that. And I think that if we're going to band together and we're going to talk about oppression, we're going to talk about marginalized groups, we're going to talk about POC, we're going to talk about multiculturalism, then it needs to include everybody. And it needs to not be this very linear thing where it's like, okay, we're only talking about this person, right? Like you can't be of another marginalized group and don't want to stand against racism for Black people. You know what I mean? And if that is the case and that is your stance, then you can't expect Black people to band together with you. And it's not really like this petty matter of like, oh, we were here first. But it's like, no, seriously, how can we really negate this really grotesque history that is America? You know what I mean? Like, I just don't think that's fair. And so I think when we talk about racism and things like that, it's just not okay. And this is my overall premise. Like, this one's my conclusion. It's not okay to hijack someone else's plight for your own benefit, for your own desire to be heard and seen and have your struggles addressed within your community when your community is far more ahead economically, resourcefully, communally, and all these different things. Like there is some growth here. And there's not to say there's not progression within the Black community, but when we start looking at I was making this point, like, I feel like when we start looking at societally and like collectively, there are a lot of marginalized groups who are a lot further than Black people because of the positive bias in this case that I was referencing, and how it tends and leans towards their benefit in their plight towards equality, or you know what I mean? So it's like, I know there's some missing pieces here, and I always feel like these conversations are kind of tricky, but I do think that that's like a big thing. Like, I think that like if we're gonna do this, like, we have to stand for each other. We can't just be like, oh, why you only talk about Black people? Why you only talk about, like, no. If we're gonna do this, then we have to stand together. And like, you can't hijack the oppression of Black people and put yourself on center stage and say, listen to me, like, I'm the one who's being oppressed, when like this has been the history for generations of Black people in America who are still fighting the same plight. You know what I mean? Like, that's my thing. So I think that that's more so what I was trying to say. And I wasn't really trying to, again, make this point of like, you guys don't have struggles, or other marginalized groups don't have struggles. It's just more so like, if we're going to do this, it's completely not okay to just like erase the plight of Black people and hijack this, what they're going through, and just chalk it all up to the name of like, oh, they're just not working hard enough. And I think one thing that I always wanted to make clear too, like, even as I'm learning, as I'm growing, as I'm progressing, it's like, I completely hear what people are saying. I'm not here for just like giving people a pass, but I think that it's a really hard thing when you're not living it. That's all I'm going to say. And I just think that like, whenever people try to talk about this, especially marginalized groups, okay, it's so important that you just kind of be careful what you say and like how you say it, because you're not living it. You're not living it. And I think that's more so like my biggest thing. And so I think sometimes one of the things that I've always kind of like despised and I just kind of struggle with is really trying to tie in experience with statistics, with, you know what I mean? Like, really tying in the observational pieces of it with factual evidence and like concrete statistical evidence. Because I just think that that's sometimes that gets blurred along the way. And I think that's kind of where you have the opinion writing, but you also have it coupled with research. And I think I always want to try to come level-headed. You know, I'm not trying to just speak solely from my experience, and I'm not just trying to be like super emotional, because I know this piece was like, it's emotional in that sense. But I do think that it's time to like realize like, okay, wait. You know what I mean? Like, you can't have kind of like these very racist notions that are these negative biases about Black people, that Black people don't work hard, and then like hijack the plight and be like, listen to me, this is the like, you know what I mean? That's not okay. That's not okay. And I think that this is just another topic too, where again, still learning, still growing. I do think, just from what I've been reading in the laws that have been outlawed and canceled and all these different things that are being excluded from the constitutions, it is something that's very concerning. And it does seem to be like the overall pejorative is definitely race-based and race-centered. And we know that, racism is something that is the heartthrob of America, right? So it's like, there are people who are impoverished, and that is unintentionally. And, there are people who are, impacted by certain things. And if you're not really living that experience, you don't really know what it's like on a day-to-day. I think that there are a lot of Black people who choose not to be the victim, and them choosing not to be the victim is choosing not to speak up and speak out and share their experiences in regards to race and racism and racial discrimination, whether it be on a job, wherever, because they know that people who claim to be like liberal or progressive, or, you know what I mean? Like some other marginalized groups now, right? Like, people will try to deny that experience, and they will try to deny that reality. And so it's like, instead of being gaslit, let me just keep my sanity. Let me just keep my peace and not share this. Or maybe I can share this in a creative way where there's a very safe avenue. And I think for so many Black people, I think that a lot of Black people have chosen not to be the victim, right? When we look at the progression of Black people, we look at Black people who are succeeding, the boom of entrepreneurship, like the rebirthing, and like, you know what I mean? The heart of it, like kind of coming back. And I don't even want to say coming back, because come on, like, it's always been there. So let me not, but seriously, like, when we start to look at that and we start to see Black people who are succeeding in this very general sense, like, it's very evident that Black people don't want to be victims. They don't consider themselves victims, even though they are significantly impacted disproportionately by a system that seeks to exemplify them and like keep them out of certain rooms and certain opportunities. And it starts very early on. I think when you start looking back at things like being put in the ghetto, you know what I mean? You start looking at redlining and all, like, it's just, I think it's really hard to try to then project outward and fast forward to 2023 and be like, no, there's no way that this is still happening today. You know what I mean? I think that's a really hard thing. And I think that's probably my problem with the erasure of the African-American literature and like the conversations that people don't want to have. Because it's like, when you really start to look at the cause and effect, for so many people, that's where it's like, we have to just go silent. We don't want to talk about it anymore. Like, oh no, you just can't be the victim. You're not working hard enough. You know what I mean? When it's like, no, I am working hard, but I'm letting you know what I'm dealing with along the way. You know what I mean? And I'm still persisting. And I think if that was the case, then I think like just from like what I've seen, let me just say this, what I've seen. Most people that I know, and particularly men, but some women as well, but particularly men, they have these degrees and they always end up pursuing entrepreneurship. There is actually a Black journalist that is close to me in proximity as far as like cities. And she graduated, you know, she actually went to Howard and she couldn't find a job. And now she's working entrepreneurially. Like, I just think that like there's something said about that. And I do think that like numbers have to be ran. But I also think too, again, like as a writer, this is kind of where it's like we have to kind of find that balance between like observations, because like you can't deny a reality. You know what I mean? And like I think that that's the thing about social media algorithm, and I'm just going to end here, is everyone's having a different reality. And I'm humble enough to know that I need to work on this approach. And I'm also aware enough to know that I don't have the range and the exposure as far as like different ethnic groups. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Growing up predominantly around white people and so forth, like you don't really have that range to like totally speak to that. And I just think that that's the same grace that other people need to extend Black people, especially in the world that really works really hard to try to cover up the racism. That's my TED Talk. So I just felt like today was a good day to kind of sit and explain and kind of talk about that, because I just noticed that sometimes the emotion can just be so jarring and so moving that like I'm just propelled to write. And you want to kind of step back and be like, you know I can't make everybody happy. And I'm aware of that. Like the truth is truly a double-edged sword. But at the same time, I want to be intentional. And I want to be consistent with my intentions to kind of like enlighten. And I think that is a tough thing. And as I'm watching this masterclass with Roxane Gay, I think that is a tough thing, because I do think as Black women, especially, I was even thinking for myself as I even wrote that article today, and just the emotions I was going through, just always feeling as though I do have to be out on the front lines in regards to my community. You know, feeling as though I do have to be the one who is the voice of reason, who, you know, looks out for people and so forth. And that's a very heavy burden. But we'll talk about that another day. Peace.